All right, Jason. So why are we doing a show today about defensive investing?
For a couple of reasons. Number one is we saw a little bit of volatility recently back in the market. And so anytime there's volatility, people's antennas kind of perk up, and then there's so much bad news. The latest thing is this flu that's going around. And so, but I can just about guarantee that next month will be something different, and the next month after that will be something different. I can guarantee there will be bad news on at any month throughout the years.
I agree.
But the other reason I want to talk about defense is we've got the Super Bowl coming up, and so I've been thinking about how important defense is in football. And then also I'm reading, or actually enjoying, a new book through Audible. I've been listening to a book called The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And some of that book is really inspiring me, and it's just making me think about how important it is to have a good defense plan in retirement.
All right. So, Jason, I know you have a bunch of quotes you're excited to share with us. So do you want to share those first before we get into today's show?
Yes. Some of these are football related. Some of them are from this book that I'm listening to. So, okay. So first one, this is from Keith Cunningham. It says, sometimes gains are losses avoided. Sometimes gains are losses avoided. So just not losing sometimes is a gain. I thought that was pretty cool. And then he said, you have to have a plan and have the people to execute the plan. And then a couple of football quotes are, offense wins games, defense wins championships. Or this is another one I enjoyed. If we score, we might win. If they never score, we can't lose. Offense sells tickets. Defense wins games. I guess we'll find out here this coming Sunday if this is going to play out or not. But and then this was from Vince Lombardi. He says, go back through football and you will see that the team with the best defense wins. It's pretty hard to argue with Vince Lombardi. Now, this next one is again from Keith Cunningham in this book, The Road Less Stupid. He said, and this really struck home when it comes to retirement planning. Listen to this. He says, it is better to ensure survival under negative outcomes than it is to predict success under favorable ones. Let me say that again. It is better to ensure survival under negative outcomes than it is to predict success under favorable ones. That was pretty good. The book, The One Thing by Howard Marks, he says, the possibility of permanent loss is the risk I worry about. The possibility of permanent loss. We're going to be talking a little bit about that because I've met people that have experienced permanent loss. The money's not coming back, so how can we avoid that? Here's another quote by Howard Marks from the book, The One Thing. He says, risk control is the best route to loss avoidance. Risk avoidance, on the other hand, is likely to lead to return avoidance as well. Oh. It can't just be one or the other.
Great quotes.
Warren Buffett says, the most common cause of low prices is pessimism. And of course, that's when Warren Buffett likes to buy things from low prices. He says, it is optimism that is the enemy of the rational buyer. And so given that we're in the longest bull market in the history of the stock market, I think, understanding pessimism and optimism is good to be thinking about.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing those quotes. So, Jason, let's go ahead and get into our show for today again and just talk about why is defensive investing so important?
Because people really, most of the time, only want to retire once. Now, I know we've served some people that have retired 3 times because they retire and somebody gets them to come back to work, and then they retire from a second career, and then they go back to work and they retire again. But for the most part, Emilia, people don't want to have to go back to work once they've decided that they're done. And the other thing is, a lot of times people have their highest and best income the last couple of years of their retirement. So you want to be really careful about giving up a really good job, a really good salary, until you really know the numbers are going to work. My friend, my mentor, Dean, used to say to me, he said, Jason, life is not a dress rehearsal. He said, this is the real deal, baby. And he said, now go give it everything you got with everything you got. Mm-hmm. Most people don't want to go back to work when they're retired, but the challenge they have is that it doesn't necessarily depend on their performance, right? So when we're working, we have some control, some influence about whether or not we're going to get promoted. We can go out and work really hard. But now that your money's working for you, you've got these forces working against you that you may not be able to control. And things like the stock market volatility. None of us can control that. And so to be in a position where you're handing over your future to something that's completely unpredictable can be a little bit unnerving. So we have to talk about how do you create a structure to give you more confidence as you're heading into retirement.
Great. So Jason, why should people in retirement stay away from exotic alternatives?
Yes. And this reminds me of that quote from Howard Marks in his book, The One Thing. He says, "The possibility of permanent loss is the risk I worry about." And this is what I worry about too. What's the worst case scenario? What's the absolute worst case downside if you get involved with certain types of investments? And unfortunately, Emilia, this is something we run into all the time. One is because there's bad people out there that are looking to deceive. I'll never forget years ago in our little community, driving down the road, there was a sign up, little sandwich board that said 12% returns or something. Of course, at the time, bank CDs were paying like 3%. And so, something just didn't look right, didn't feel right, didn't smell right. Well, of course, that turned out to not be a real deal. People lost a lot of money in that because there's this thing called greed, and people think that there's a way to make it big. And you hear these stories all the time about these con artists that steal money from people. So that's number one. If it sounds too, the old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, probably is. But then the other thing is there are some financial tools out there that have these really enticing, and usually it's around income, it's around cash flow. Some of the things that we've run into where people have invested money and then it doesn't work out the way that they planned are things like non-traded real estate investment trusts, non-traded REITs, or master limited partnerships, things that are not publicly traded, these non-traded entities. This is where I find people getting into the most trouble. And so I'm always reminding people, Emilia, that part of an advisor's job is to help people stay out of things that they shouldn't be getting investing in at this point in their life anyways. So, if you're 30 years old, 40 years old, and you want to take a lot of risk on something where you put all your money in and a year from now, all the money's gone, there's nothing to have, and you're comfortable with that risk, well, maybe that's okay at 40 years old because you have time to recover. But at 60 or 70 years old, you really don't want to be getting involved with things that have that much risk associated with them.
Yeah. And that leads into my next question. So, Jason, why is having trusted advisors important?
Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's easy to make emotional decisions when it's your money. Two, I was thinking about my son, and he's a basketball player. And, the interesting thing about basketball is when you shoot the ball, you have a sense, you have a feel for what you think your shot looks like. But when you have a coach, somebody that's standing on the outside, the coach can actually see what your form is. Are you following through? Are you balanced? Have you squared up beforehand? And it's hard to see yourself shoot the ball. And so when you have an outside perspective looking in, it gives you that unique ability to have somebody else looking at what you're doing. And so I think that's the real value of having somebody that's not emotionally involved in that decision-making process. The other thing people need to be thinking about as they head into retirement, and they know this, but cognitive decline is real, and it happens to a lot of folks. And if you don't have a relationship with somebody that you trust before you get into a position when you start to lose your cognitive ability, most people don't recognize it in themselves when they're losing their cognitive ability. So, and then the challenge they're going to have is if they go to try to find an advisor once their cognitive ability is slipping, a lot of advisors don't want that type of responsibility. They don't want to accept a client who's showing obvious signs of cognitive decline. And so it's really good to be thinking out into the future to say, okay, what if I start to slip? Who's going to step in and make sure I don't make a big mistake and give all of my money to some guy on the TV, late at night? So really important to have people looking out after you.
Great advice.